Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini. Chris, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Good. Well, today we're going to talk about the Fed. We're going to talk about the gold, and we might as well mention this report that came out today on employment. So that stirred up the market, stirred up gold, and certainly the stocks loved it. So we want to address that a little bit because the original reason for thinking about this subject was early part of the week because of the badgering that Powell was getting from the president, successfully getting him to back off. And when the announcement came, boy, it doesn't look like we're ever going to raise interest rates. And the market liked it. And since that time, it's gone up 1,200 points. So it doesn't matter. And even today's employment report, it wasn't that great. It was, very weak in times. I was impressed with the idea that there were quite a few jobs that were lost, but they were the full-time jobs, and a significant number. So those numbers are superficial, but anyway, they were negative even for the marketplace. But you'd think, well, if they're negative and things aren't going well, maybe we ought to be cautious about the stocks. But we live in an age, and you know this, Chris, that we live in an age where Wall Street is sort of divorced from reality. And the reality to them is only what are interest rates going to be, and how long are they going to be low, and how long can we keep this bubble going? And certainly Trump wants to keep the bubble going. He wants to prevent a recession. He's done nothing to prevent the recession that is coming, but it's not his fault either, because a lot of mistakes were made over the past especially over the last 10 years. So there will have to be these corrections. But he certainly wants low interest rates. He understands that, and he understands the political significance of a weak economy and a weak stock market, and he measures the stock market as the economy because it gets all the headlines. So I think it's going to be a touch-and-go contest here. It's a race. It's a race to the polls next year to find out how this is all going to work. But at least today, that got the attention of a lot of people. It got the attention of the gold market. The gold market, of course, has been getting attention. And they say, well, gold is in the doldrums. It's in a bear market. But did anybody pay any attention? Gold in the last 30 days is up $60. That's not too bad for just having a little safety and a little security. So I think we do live in interesting times. I think it's going to be impossible for the smartest Fed chairman in the world to pull this mess out of the fire, because I think some of these things are ingrained in previous action. That is, the previous inflation, the previous distortions have to be corrected. They can tide it over and make the bubble bigger, but I do not believe for a minute that the collusion now of the Federal Reserve doing what the president wants by promising to the business audience in the financial market, okay, we won't raise interest rates. So far, they like it. But Chris, I don't think that's going to last for very long.
Oh, of course it won't. And, you almost yearn to have the candidate Trump back, because he told the truth back then. He said we're in a big, fat, ugly bubble, and he was 100% correct. But then he made one of the major mistakes once he became president, and he put his name on the bubble. It was no longer a bubble. It was the greatest economy ever, just like that. And, he says that he just said that the stock market would be up 10,000 more points if the Fed didn't raise rates. But the Fed only raised rates up to 2%, and everything started to fall apart. That's how bad the economy is. The distortions are so bad that we can't handle a minuscule 2%. But they all want it more now. More bubble, more debt, and it looks like you pointed out, that the Fed is going to give it to them, but look out below once it pops.
I think the irony of all this is Trump may be right. What they're doing with the money and the deception and the way the mental status is in the financial markets, printing like crazy might push the stock markets back up. They're probably 10,000 points too high now because of what they've done for 10 years. But what if the momentum is so great that they do keep printing, which they promise they will, that it goes up another 10,000? What does that mean? I think the people should be more frightened than anything, because that means the bubble is so huge, and it just means more debt and more distortion. And I think that is very, very dangerous. And the question nobody seems to want to ask, because we live in an age where there's no inflation, and the Fed has not done a good job because they haven't produced enough inflation. And we're working hard, folks, for 2% inflation. What a farce that is. But if you go and you get the stock market to go up because so much inflation, and it survives that long, and it goes up 10,000 points, what do you think medical care costs are going to be like? What are the costs of building airplanes that we don't need? What will they cost? What will be the cost of education in this country? Do you think they're going to be immune, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, we're going to get those liberals in office and we're just going to mandate everything for free? It is so absurd. That low interest rates will solve all our problems. And that is the basic flaw, I think, in the system of Keynesian interventionism and inflationism, is the fact that they do not understand the importance of interest rates. And right now, it is proven to be beneficial to those who gambled and knew, well, these interest rates are going to go up and they have to do it, and therefore we better get involved in bonds. Even when there's 2%, they say, oh, it's even going down again. Well, that's what's happening. The bonds did well, with this recent announcement. But that is almost an insanity. But on the short run, it seems to help. On the long run, we're going to have to think about what structurally has to be changed. And of course, that's where we'd like to introduce the notion that we ought to seriously consider gold as part of the monetary system.
Right, Dr. Paul, and you use the word farce, and that's exactly what we have. They presume to have knowledge that they do not and cannot have. We always hear about how the Fed is monitoring the economy and they're going to act appropriately. But the economy is millions and millions of individual decisions based on what those individuals think in their minds at that second. The economy is not a machine that needs to be monitored. It's impossible. All that they do, and we actually see polls. How do you think Trump is running the economy? Trump does not run the economy. That's a farce. The economy runs, and central banks and governments interfere with the economy. They distort the economy. They ruin the economy. And that's the farce that people have to get rid of believing in order for us to have something sane to work with.
See, and the other thing that's contributing to this chaos and badgering the Fed will not help. And this is, in a way, I think motivated Trump to really do something, because he doesn't take the blame for it, but the trade war is despicable. It's not wise for anybody, even though on the surface people say, oh yeah, it did this and it's a beneficial. But when you look at it, trade wars never work. And this whole idea that you tax the people you're trying to protect and say that you're doing a lot of good, it makes no sense. So he's trying to get the Fed to rescue the economy from an economic problem created by Trump that he doesn't admit to. And the other thing that they depend on, sort of, a moral hazard, is the moral hazard, of course, of the Fed always inflating and printing money and bailing out. But the moral hazard of the plunge protection team on a very short run, I believe they stay busy all the time. And even though they do not have ultimate control of the markets overwhelm, but they're involved. If they think that the dollar has to be weaker, they can contribute to that, or the price of gold, statistics, all these things. But they're very, very active, which means that this is super intervention. And to me, it's ironic that it was introduced during the stock market crash, or crunch in 87 by the Republicans. Of course, Reagan did this with a presidential order to establish his plunge protection team. And they're not people without power. It's the Federal Reserve, it's Treasury, CFTC, and SEC. They have a huge amount of power to regulate and push things in different direction and put on sanctions. And we live in a lawless society. I mean, all the things that are done, we complain a lot on this program about going to war without permission of the Congress. Well, what about these trade wars? And what about all these sanctions going on? It's lawlessness that goes on, and that is a big problem. So they don't really even have to have a consensus, from the people until it's too late. And then when they do get the consensus, the media is all wants to pile on, well, maybe socialism is the answer. We don't have enough socialism. We don't have enough government. We need more debt. Don't worry about this. Instead of saying, why don't we look to ourselves and find out the policies that have, caused our trouble, and and they fail to look at what our history shows, that when we were a much freer country, and the freer a country is, the more prosperous the country is, the greater the middle class is, and the more government you have distributing wealth for the middle class and for the poor, the wealthier get the people at the top. So it doesn't work, but they pursue it because they do not want to accept austerity, and that is cut spending. And the people like this program. People don't want austerity. I mean, you'd have to cut back a little bit on living off other people and living off inflation. And besides, deficits don't matter. I mean, it's a tough nut to crack. And my experience in Washington says that you can't expect it to happen. It's not going to happen. The only chance we have is at the time this thing comes down on us, and that date comes closer and closer to us, we ought to be prepared to present the case for sound money. And sound money means that you have to have something that the governments can't print. You can't have a secret Federal Reserve system. And that's what has to be available to the people. And Chris, I think we're going to have an opportunity to present our side of that argument.
I agree, Dr. Paul. And I'll finish by going back 11 years to the 2008 crash. There was a bubble. And if you could believe it, it was a smaller bubble than what we have today. So, but back then it was desperation time. Bear Stearns, Merrill Lynch, Lehman Brothers, they were like dominoes going down. And they didn't know what to do, the Fed. So they just created trillions and trillions of dollars and slapped the name QE on it. And the chairman at the time, Bernanke, said to Congress, this is temporary. We're going to sell all these bonds. This is a temporary measure. Well, today we hear from Chairman Powell that it's not temporary. This is now what they do regularly. So the desperation is even greater today, if you could believe it. And this all boils down to, like Dr. Paul said, bad ideas. It's a bad idea to have government create money because it'll create money to grow itself. And today we have the biggest government ever. Isn't that interesting? And we can't have a central bank either. We need free markets, money that is detached from government, and liberty.
I want to close by talking a little bit about the issue of gold, which I've talked a lot about in the past, and we imply that gold could well be the answer to paper. And a lot of people don't believe that. Our governments don't believe it. When I asked Bernanke about gold, whether it was money or not, he said, no, it's not money. And I said, well, why do you keep it? Why do governments keep it? Central banks hold it. He says, well, that's just old tradition, no big deal. But guess what? There's a lot of central banks buying gold right now, and I say sort of like that tradition. Sure, there are shortcomings in gold. Because there hasn't been a perfect gold standard, which we should always work for. But the gold standard is better than the paper standard because there's more abuse with the paper, and the paper standard encourages huge government and encourages these bubbles. So a gold standard to really work has to be a gold coin standard where a consumer who holds his paper money can turn it into gold instantaneously anytime he walks into a bank or wherever. That would be a lot different. Now, there's also the shortcoming of a metallic standard is that governments are ruthless because it challenges big government. there's a big contest. If you're moving in with a gold standard to restrain big government, then not only do you have the academicians against you, you have every government official. You have both Democrats and Republicans. Oh, that's crazy. We'll be limited on how we spend the money. They'll catch us and we won't be allowed to run up these deficits. But when push came to shove in the Depression, that was the first thing that Roosevelt did, take away the right to own gold because they might protect themselves for what was coming. And that has been abused over the years. Fortunately, in 1975, the American people regained their liberty to own gold because I think the planners actually convinced themselves that gold isn't money and it doesn't matter anymore. We've convinced them that you have a Federal Reserve System to take care of things. But you know, when the Fed came into existence, gold was $20 an ounce. When Roosevelt took into gold in 32, 33, he switched it to $35 an ounce, and by rigid controls, even though, especially the control of the market, because we weren't allowed to own it, gold stayed at $35 an ounce all the way up to 1971. And then the market overwhelmed, and the market said, no, gold is worth a lot more. And then there was catch up to do, and gold went from $35 an ounce up to $800 an ounce in that decade. But that was a little bit too much too fast. There had to be a correction. It took a long time to correct that. By the beginning of this century, gold, although it had been up to $800, went down to $270, which was overshoot. It was way too low. But, you know, the inflation machine was there. The inflation came back again, and it went from $270 up into $1,900 just a few years back. And then it had to make a correction. But right now, I think we're in the middle of a bull market in gold. We've had a bull market from 20 to 35 and 35 to 800. But I think now that 270 up to 1800, that correction has been made, and in 2016, just 3 years ago, gold was at $1,000, $1,050, I think, and since that time, it's gone up $300 and some dollars, and it's not been gigantic. But in the last week, it went up $60 because there's more concern. And markets aren't smooth, and they're not like they're perfect, and you can't predict them because there's human action involved, and you can't tell. But you look at the long term, and you know what's happening. The long term tells me that I had the right instincts in 1971, because that was when I got interested in monetary policy, interested in politics, and gold was, at that time, $35 an ounce. Well, if you take somebody who put $35 and bought an ounce of gold in 1971 and compare that to putting into a treasury bill, a 3-month or even a 10-year treasury bill, you can't believe the difference in purchasing power from that gold compared to the purchasing power of the dollars. The dollar value goes down, and it never keeps up. You never make enough interest, and there are more dollars around, and purchasing power goes down, real wages go down. But long term now, the purchasing power of gold is moving up again, and people will discover it. They will have to do it. And I think this is why some countries that are considered, well, not very good capitalists, those Chinese, they're beating us, but that's because they're authoritarian. They might be using some capitalistic issues by selling stuff, saving their money, and investing overseas. And I think that well could be the case. But right now, the whole process is under siege, and it has to be answered by restraint on government. That is the reason. Restraint on the Federal Reserve System, the secrecy of the Federal Reserve, this silly notion that you can create wealth by creating digits in a computer and just passing them out and have anything you want for free. It's nutty, insane how people can accept this idea. All we have to do is print more, faster, and everybody will be helped. My main concern and my interest in this is not only because people should protect themselves. I think it's a freedom issue. I think this whole issue is a freedom issue. This strategy of the central banking of the last 50, 60 years around the world has all been geared to pay for big government. Big government always undermines personal liberties and encourages wars. And that is why we're in this situation. And right now, the amount of worldwide debt is like $250 trillion, and it's just huge. Our corporate debt is way out of control. That will need correcting, just like the $35 an ounce of gold in 1971 needed correction, and it broke down. So this system, these bubbles are going to burst, and that will offer an opportunity for those individuals who would like something more honest, who believe in liberty, will endorse the notion that gold and silver are the currencies that the Constitution gives us. Only gold and silver should be legal tender. Now that is not the case. But the issue is liberty, and liberty cannot be preserved without sound money. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.